They looked at her and saw ordinary, maybe even less than that. They looked at her and didn't see the weight of the call that heaven had whispered into her spirit while the world slept. She didn't wear it loud. She didn't announce it. She just carried it quietly, faithfully, without applause. They judged her by her background, by her silence, by the way she didn't fit the mold. But what they didn't realize is that sometimes the ones God chooses don't fit the mold, because they were never meant to blend in with what man approves. They were shaped by divine hands for something more. She was overlooked in rooms where she should have been honored. She was left out of tables she was destined to build. And still she stayed. Still she endured. Because deep down the marrow of her soul, there was a knowing, a fire that wouldn't die, even when the winds of rejection blew fierce. They laughed at her dreams, mocked her hope, questioned her value. They tried to reduce her identity to what she hadn't yet done, what she didn't yet have. But heaven doesn't call based on status. Because when a woman walks with the pain of rejection in one hand and the promise of God in the other, she becomes unstoppable. When she doesn't need validation to move forward, when she doesn't need agreement to say yes to the call, she becomes a force that hell cannot hold. They rejected her, but it was just the beginning. They thought her story ended at their dismissal, but they never saw the author still holding the pen. She didn't rise with pride. She rose with purpose. And purpose doesn't shout. It shows up. It wakes up early. It stays late. It doesn't need permission because it already has God's instruction. While they were whispering about her weakness, she was wrestling with God in the dark, coming out with a limp and a mantle. While they were pointing out her flaws, she was being refined by the fire they thought would consume her. But fire doesn't destroy gold. It reveals it. So now they watch. Same eyes that rolled in disbelief, same mouths that spoke doubt, same people who thought they knew how her story would end, and they watch her walk in what she was always meant for. But what they don't realize is this: her rising wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving God right. Because he chose her long before she was strong, long before she was confident, long before she had it together. He saw the end from the beginning and said, she's the one. That's the mystery of divine selection. God doesn't wait for you to be ready. He calls you when you're still unsure, still healing, still in pieces. And it's in the process that the choosing becomes the proving. She was chosen in the shadows, and the rejection she faced wasn't a curse. It was the setup. A divine weight that didn't make sense. But it was necessary. Every no was a redirection. Every closed door was a mercy. Every time they didn't believe in her, it only drove her deeper into the presence of the one who always had. She stopped needing them to see her, because she knew heaven never looked away. She stopped crying over rooms that rejected her, because she realized God had built one where her name was already on the seat. And now you wonder how she made it, how she rose, how she survived the weight of being doubted, dismissed, and discarded. It wasn't talent. It wasn't luck. It wasn't who she knew. It was grace. It was grit. It was the quiet thunder of a woman who knew that being overlooked by man doesn't mean you've been forgotten by God. So let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them try to figure out how she got from the back of the line to the center of the stage. The truth is, she didn't force it. She followed God. And he made sure the very rejection that was meant to break her ended up revealing the warrior she always was. Because they didn't believe in her. But God had already chosen her. She didn't come with the crowd. She didn't bring a cheerleading section. There was no applause when she said yes to the calling on her life. No one threw a celebration when she whispered, God, I'm willing. When God chooses you, he doesn't ask the world's permission to bless you. They questioned her worth because they couldn't see her destiny. They measured her future by her past and misjudged her potential by the silence of her present. But what they didn't know is that God doesn't call based on credentials. He calls based on surrender. You don't need popularity. When you've been planted by God, she wasn't loud about her calling. She didn't wait for the green light from people who barely understood their own assignments. She didn't shrink to fit their expectations. She didn't beg them to believe in her. She knew who called her. And that knowing became her anchor. While they played politics, she prayed. While they campaigned for positions, she cultivated her character. She didn't need a spotlight because obedience was her compass. She moved when God said move, even when it didn't make sense, even when no one clapped, even when the voices around her told her to quit. That's what separates the called from the chosen. The called hear it, but the chosen walk it out. And walking it out costs something. It costs the comfort of public acceptance. It costs the safety of staying silent. It costs the security of waiting until you're ready, but she paid the price. She gave God her yes without needing the world to understand it. And that kind of yes, that kind of obedience has power. Power that can't be faked. Power that can't be denied. Power that heaven honors even when earth rejects it. So no, she didn't have the crowd. She didn't have the connections. She didn't have the perfect resume or the flawless past, but she had a yes. And God breathes on a yes. He moves through a yes. He opens doors no man can shut when a soul says yes without conditions. And that's what she gave him, a raw, real, trembling yes. They thought she was disqualified, but what they saw as disqualification, God saw as preparation. They saw scars. God saw survival. They saw failure. God saw fire. They saw a girl trying to find her place. But God saw a woman ready to shift atmospheres. And he didn't need to explain his decision, because when God calls you, he's not concerned with public opinion. He's not moved by titles or trends or tradition. He chooses who he wants, when he wants, how he wants. And so she walked it out. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but faithfully. And God met her in the obedience. He met her in the quiet yes. He met her in the places where no one else could go. And in that space, away from the noise, away from the applause, away from the doubt, he formed her, built her, anointed her. No, she stands. Not because they believed in her, but because she believed in him. Not because the world approved, but because heaven called. And that calling, it doesn't expire. It doesn't weaken when others walk away. It doesn't fade when seasons shift. It's eternal, it's holy, it's sealed by the breath of God himself. So when they ask how she made it, tell them this. She didn't wait for the world to validate what God already confirmed. She said yes. And that was enough. She walked alone, not because she wanted to, but because obedience has a way of isolating you. It pulls you out from the familiar and places you in unfamiliar places, where faith is the only thing keeping you from falling apart. She didn't choose loneliness, but when she chose God, She unknowingly chose a path not many were willing to travel. And that path was narrow, quiet. People came and went. Some left gently, others like storms. Some promised to stay but disappeared at the first sign of trouble. Some pretended to understand but never saw her heart. And through it all, she felt the ache of being unseen, unheard, misunderstood. For somehow, even in the silence, she never felt abandoned, because while others turned their backs, she could still feel the warmth of God's presence surrounding her like a quiet fire. She learned how to stand when no one was clapping, how to speak when her voice shook, how to trust when all the signs told her to give up. She discovered the beauty of being hidden, because in the hidden places, God speaks in ways the world can't hear. He whispered truth to her in the dark that no spotlight could reveal. He filled her with a strength that wasn't loud, but unbreakable. A strength that came from knowing that even if the world walked away, he never would. There were nights she cried until her pillow was soaked. Not because she doubted God's promise, but because the weight was heavy. Because doing the right thing felt lonely. Because believing when everything looks broken requires a courage most people never talk about. But heaven saw those tears. She could have chosen bitterness. She could have hardened her heart. She could have let the coldness of the world change the warmth of her spirit. But she didn't. She chose to love anyway. She chose to keep her heart soft. She chose to worship through the confusion, because she wasn't walking for applause. She was walking for alignment. And alignment with God often means misalignment with the crowd. There's something sacred about solitude when it's spent in God's presence. She learned how to hear his voice clearer in the silence. She learned how to depend on him for every step, not because she had no one else, but because he became everything she needed. The isolation became a sanctuary. God was removing the noise so she could hear him clearly. He was removing the distractions so she could see him fully. And even when it felt like everything was falling apart, what was actually happening was divine construction. God was building her from the inside out, not with bricks made of pride, but with stones of humility, obedience, and trust. That's all that they thought she was weak because she didn't fight back. They mistook her gentleness for naivety. But what they didn't know was that she was being held up by a power greater than them all. They didn't see the angels surrounding her. They didn't hear the prayers she whispered through clenched teeth. They didn't see the way God wrapped his arms around her when she was too tired to keep going. And now, she doesn't crave the crowd. She doesn't beg to be seen, because she knows who walks with her. And when you walk with God through fire and didn't burn, through storms and didn't drown, through rejection and didn't fold, you come out with a strength that can't be explained, a stillness that can't be shaken, a presence that shifts atmospheres without saying a word. She walked alone, but never without God. And that made all the difference. They doubted her, laughed when she said she was cold, rolled their eyes when she spoke a vision. She didn't argue back. She didn't shout to be heard. She didn't waste breath trying to convince them, because something deeper had already taken root inside her. A faith so steady, so bold, so unshakable, it spoke even when her lips didn't move. Her faith grew louder than their doubt. She didn't need a microphone to be understood. They whispered, she'll never make it. She whispered, God, I trust you. They said, she's not strong enough. She said, Lord, be my strength. They declared, it's impossible. She declared, with you, all things are possible. And while they were speaking death, she was breathing life. While they were predicting failure, she was planting hope. Every seed watered with prayer, every tear counted, every moment of silence became sacred, because she knew God listens even when no one else does. There was a fire in her spirit that doubt couldn't smother, a steady wind of worship that kept her moving forward even when she didn't feel strong. Every time they questioned her, it only pushed her deeper into God. Every time they tried to belittle her, it forced her to remember who her Father is. She didn't respond to hate with hate. She responded with growth. And that growth was slow, hidden, quiet, but undeniable. Eventually, the fruit began to bloom. They couldn't ignore it anymore. She praised through pain. She gave when she had little. She served without needing recognition. And that kind of posture confuses people who only understand power when it's shouted. But she knew the power of staying low, staying grounded, staying faithful. Because she wasn't building her life on popularity, she was building it on the Word. And that Word doesn't return void. They tried to bury her with doubt. Now they say she changed, but the truth is she just bloomed into who she always was. She became the evidence of what faith looks like when it's tested, tried, and still standing. And no, she didn't shout. She didn't scream. So let the world keep doubting. Let the voices keep whispering, because her faith keeps growing louder, stronger, bolder, and one day they'll realize it was never her volume that shook the room. It was her faith.